Hello, I'm Ken Kinter, and I'm an assistant professor at Rutgers University. Today's presentation is about the basics of psychiatric rehabilitation. I want to give a shout out to my coworkers, Jen Sperduto and Dawn Reinhardt-Wood, who created the initial version of this presentation, and I've merely adapted it to this particular format. So before we get rolling, I wanted to talk about what we do. The State Hospital Psychiatric Rehabilitation Initiative is an affiliation between Rutgers and the state of New Jersey to improve the quality of care and working conditions in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals. None of that is possible without the generous financial contributions and other support by the New Jersey Department of Health. So wanted to give credit where credit is due. So we belong to the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation, but yet we haven't really discussed so far what that is. So we're going to fix that right now. We're going to talk about the origin of treatment for people with severe mental illness and the origins of psychiatric rehabilitation. We're going to talk about where psychiatric rehabilitation, or PsyR, interfaces with psychology and psychiatry. We're going to discuss in detail the goals, the values, and guiding principles of psychiatric rehabilitation, and talk about how these principles can be infused at all levels of care on inpatient and outpatient basis, and specifically how we're doing it in New Jersey state psychiatric hospitals. So just to get started, we need to differentiate between mental illness and what we call severe and persistent mental illness, which you sometimes see listed as serious mental illness. 1 out of 5 people in the United States will have a mental illness at some point in their life. 1 out of 20 will have a severe or persistent mental illness. And this can be different diagnoses like schizophrenia, or it can just be a matter of the severity of the illness. Some people have depression and anxiety that's even more disabling than, the psychotic disorders. So regarding treatment for people with severe and persistent mental illness, it kind of fits into 3 different stages. There was the pre-institutional or pre-hospital stage, which was from the formation of this country until around 1848 is when this process started. The institutional process, which is the development and growth of state psychiatric hospitals, roughly the next 100 years. And then from 1955, continuing until now, sort of the de-institutional phase of treatment. So these hospitals are still there, but in decreasing numbers, and their censuses have decreased rather dramatically. And we'll get into the details of that right now. So pre-institution, before there were these hospitals, people with mental illness were either left to fend for themselves, or they were incarcerated, or the family had to take up the burden for them. What you see a picture of here is a recreation of the first colonial psychiatric hospital in Virginia. It's in the Guggenheim Museum in Williamsburg, Virginia, if you get a chance to see it. And this is what it would look like. And you can see the shackles, the chamber pot, the mattress on the floor, and they even recreated the etching that one of the patients had made. If you can see in the corner, it's a little house. It's actually a church, a house with a cross on top of it. So this is kind of where things were at the time. And remember, at this time, there were no medications to treat people with. So it was largely confinement, but there were also things like electroshock and dunking people in ice and all sorts of things, and cupping, which has come back again. So when we get to 1848, a woman by the name of Dorothea Dix, she's a fascinating Wikipedia search, by the way, she advocated to Congress for the creation of hospitals, and she was actually looking for it on the federal level. Turned out to be a state thing, but then every state was charged with developing its own state psychiatric hospitals. And what you see here is an early rendering of Trenton Psychiatric Hospital, which is the first one opened in 1848 and is still there today. Now, during this time, these hospitals became very large. By the time we got to 1955, which is when they were at the peak census, there were about 500,000 Americans in these hospitals. And not only people with mental illness, there were people with Tourette's in there, people with seizure disorders, people with addiction issues. Women were occasionally placed in these hospitals by their rich husbands so they could get no-fault divorces, but that's another story. So during this time, these facilities grew and grew and grew, and they became sort of dangerous places. And they also were kind of known for keeping people for the rest of their lives. If you've seen the movie Awakenings, you get kind of a look at a back ward in a would be a psychiatric hospital. So these places grew, and it became apparent that keeping people in hospitals for the rest of their life was cruel, but also wasn't helpful therapeutically either. So this era ended when a couple different things happened. One was we started to discover psychotropic medications such as Thorazine, Another one was the Community Mental Health Centers Act of 1963, where services were opened up in the community so that people could be treated for these illnesses in the community rather than be institutionalized. There was also Social Security, so people could get money for being disabled by psychiatric illness like they could for physical illnesses. So this is a good thing. People got to get out. They got out to be served in the community, but it came at a cost. And some of that cost was people with mental illness now moving into the criminal justice system, large numbers of people with mental illness that were homeless, moving into other, and then even being able to put in other institutions in the community like large boarding homes, which I'm sure some of you were around to remember, and I remember them well. And also the development of this thing called the revolving door. So instead of someone being in a hospital for 20 or 30 years, now they're in the hospital 20 or 30 times. So there's some good in this and there's some bad in this. Let's also remember that once people are hospitalized for a while, you don't just adapt from being in the hospital to making it on the outside anymore. And I would use the movie Shawshank Redemption as sort of a reference, for that. And the other part of it was these community mental health agencies were completely overwhelmed. They were not funded to support the numbers of people that were coming in the door. And also a great number of people with mental illness don't realize that they're mentally ill. Their symptoms sort of preclude the insight that they have this illness. And if you don't have an illness, what are you going to report for treatment for? And then that's the gateway back into various systems again. So psychiatric rehabilitation initially developed as an effort to help people maintain their tenure in the community and not just cycle back into one sort of institution or another, but also to help improve the quality of not only care, but life, so that you don't live in a certain place and have to do a certain thing and be more fully integrated into the community as a whole instead of just a part of it, trading one institution for another. So as far as the definition of psychiatric rehabilitation, talked about some of it already. It's about recovery, community integration, and improved quality of life. It doesn't make the illness go away, but it means that the illness doesn't prevent someone from living a full life or from having choices and dreams and, be able to have meaningful roles in their life. Now, it's very important to state that psychiatric rehabilitation is not a replacement for psychology or psychiatry. This built on that medical model. Without those advances in medication, without other advances in treatment, this doesn't happen. I would compare it to somebody who's being treated for diabetes. You need to have the medication, you need to have the treatment, but then, where's the life that comes with that? Life can't just be about treatment. So psychiatric rehabilitation complements these medical model things and hopefully builds upon them so that a person can, again, you want to have that person to have as much of a choice in their life as possible and to have the same options that someone without the illness has. So psychiatric rehabilitation has different principles and values, and I know you can read these. I just wanted to touch on some of the major words, the major concepts that are in here. And the first one is my favorite, and that is hope. Hope, just the idea that things can get better and that we don't pick and choose who gets better and who doesn't. I've been in the field for about 30 years now, and I am a terrible choice at saying, oh, this person I think has a really good prognosis and this person doesn't. I've seen lots of people who I thought were going to do really well, didn't. And then people that I did not think had much of a chance ended up doing very well. So everybody has a shot, and that's all that matters. The importance of culture. Mental illness has an impact on everybody, but it has a different impact on certain cultures, certain groups of people, and that has to be taken into consideration. The illness is seen in the cultural context, the recovery has to be in that cultural context. Just in the way of an example, in some cultures, mental illness is not only bringing shame upon yourself, but the stigma also extends to the family. You've shamed your family. So that's something that has to be taken into account when working with treatment. So, and culture involves all sorts of things: race, sex, gender, age, where you are, geographically, all of those things come into play. Shared decision-making, that a person is not only a member of the treatment team, but the center of the treatment team, and that decisions can't be made about a person without them being right in the room. Strengths-based, so it's not just the symptoms and not just what's causing a problem for that person, but what are their assets? What are the good things they bring to the table? Person-centered, we're treating the whole person. And as mentioned before, full community integration, that they have all the choices and options available to them that someone without a mental illness would have. Self-determination and empowerment. This means the ability to fail. We don't help people by protecting them and insulating them against life. They're going to have to live life, at some point. So, and think about ourselves. We've learned by failing, in psych rehab, we call it failing forward. You learn how to catch by dropping the ball a couple times. The development of personal support networks. What is the safety net that keeps you well, that keeps people out of the hospital, out of institutions? Improving quality of life, promoting health and wellness to address the radical loss of life that people with severe and persistent mental illness have, which according to the research can be anywhere from 20 to 25 years or more. Evidence-based and promising practices. Part of psychiatric rehabilitation is doing research. What works? Why does it work? What are the components that make it work, and how do we maintain fidelity to that model? So it's not just, oh, we think it works because we think it works and because someone tells us it works. We need to see evidence of it. Accessible, integrated, and holistic. Another very, very important parts. We're treating the whole person, and the person has to be able to get to the treatment, which is a big challenge, certainly in parts of this country. So the goals we're looking for, we've alluded to some of these already. We want to reduce symptoms and the distress that those symptoms cause. We want to improve that person's skills, specifically in the area of functioning in the community. We want them to live and live well, be connected to services. We want to promote that person's empowerment so that they feel empowered to make their own decisions for what's best for them. As we've addressed improving someone's physical health, and again, that full community integration. You're going to hear that one a lot. That's a big one. So in New Jersey State Psychiatric Hospital, these are some of the tools that we use and the interventions that we use to bring these principles and goals and values into the hospital. I'm not going to go over every one of these. I suggest that you look them up, and we have videos about several of these as well. So these are all things that are geared toward bringing these principles to that person, empowering them, helping them learn the skills so that they can get out of the hospital and stay out of the hospital. These interventions are also not exclusive to inpatient settings. They can be used in outpatient settings, everything from therapy, from private practice, all the way down through day programs, et cetera, et cetera. I would suggest if you work for a mental health provider, I would look these things up and see, hey, how could we make these work where we are? They might need tweaking to work in your facility, but the idea of psychiatric rehabilitation is how can you advance that tide of those values and those goals and those principles into your facility? And these tools may be some of the ways to do that. We have manuals about several of these so that we've got the recipe down, so you can just put it together for yourself. So kind of getting near the home stretch here, but I wanted to point out a couple things, a couple people that are of crucial importance to the field of psychiatric rehabilitation. First is Dr. Anthony, who's been sort of regarded as the father of psychiatric rehabilitation. Unfortunately, he passed away not that long ago. Served tirelessly to advance this field, and is very responsible for a lot of the information that we have. Boston University was a center, and still is a center of psychiatric rehabilitation. Textbooks come from there. A lot of information comes from there. They've helped build a lot of this field, and we wanted to give credit where credit is due there. Not to take this analogy too far, but if Dr. Anthony is the father of psychiatric rehabilitation, I would put out that Pat Deegan is either its mother or at very least its poet laureate. She is someone, according to her own story, she became very sick. She had a psychotic episode when she was 17 years old, was involved in treatment, was involved in restraint and medication and all the stuff that comes with being someone with severe and persistent mental illness. However, she recovered, became a clinical psychologist, and is now an extremely eloquent voice for recovery. If you are interested in this subject at all, her website would be the next place I would go. Google her name, look at her videos, look at the information that she's done. It's extremely inspiring for those of us who work in the field, and also for those of us who are in recovery from mental illnesses and addictions as well. You know, recovery is something that you do, and she's positive proof that it works, and she's helping to bring others along. So definitely check that out. So to wrap this up, basically psychiatric rehabilitation is about, in short, getting people whose lives have been devastated by severe and persistent mental illness and addictions, and helping them to get back into life as fully as possible. It's a unique journey, even though it has common elements for many people. Everyone's journey is a little bit different. but the recovery impacts every part of a person's life, just like the illness impacts part of everybody's life. And we have tried, as the Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation in Rutgers University, we've strived very hard to bring this principle into the people that are most ill in our state. Because again, how ill somebody is doesn't mean that they are excluded from this. We want to deliver all of these interventions to them to help move people on in their lives, whatever the next step of their life looks like. Certainly out of the hospital, but also not only surviving, but thriving in the community. So just the last piece to talk about regarding the accessibility of mental health care. 1 in 5 Americans experienced a mental illness in 2020. 1 in 20 experienced a severe and persistent mental illness. So we're talking about 5% of our population. 1 in 15 Americans experience mental illness and addiction. And here's where we get into the difficult part regarding care. 4.9 million Americans were unable to access care, and the delay between onset and treatment is 11 years. Now, in a medical situation, that would be completely unacceptable, and it should be completely unacceptable in a psychiatric situation as well. So as far as we've come, we've still got a long way to go in terms of who we reach in treatment and also the quality of the care that they receive. So if you like what you heard, go tell somebody. Welcome to have comments about this presentation or things that you would like us to cover in future conversations. Please feel free to subscribe and share this. We appreciate your feedback, and we definitely appreciate your time staying with this today. This is the sources, including the beginning. First one is the Pat Deegan site we were talking about. And if you look at the link at the bottom, this is where all of our other videos are located. If you got this on my YouTube channel, there's a different version of all these presentations there that has a post-test and a certificate of attendance if you want to check those out. At this point, there's over 30 of them, and we're always adding to that. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and we'll catch you next time on the next subject.